Hello, everyone. I'm super excited to be talking with you all today. My name is Majesty Uwagerikpe. I am a product manager on the Microsoft Graph Connectors team, and I'm so excited to be collaborating with my colleague Waldek, who is a Microsoft 365 developer advocate, to talk to you all about Graph Connectors and Dev Proxy. So with Dev Proxy, you can test your Graph Connector Teams app end-to-end in minutes, and today we'll show you how. Brief overview of what Microsoft Graph Connectors are. So Graph Connectors are a way for organizations to bring their line of business data into Microsoft Graph, which is the data fabric that powers intelligent experiences such as Copilot for M365, Microsoft Search, and more. So you have content in ServiceNow, Jira, CRMs, enterprise websites, and more. Microsoft Graph Connectors are the perfect way to get that data into Graph. But why exactly would you want to package your Graph Connector as a Teams app? Well, there are a multitude of potential reasons. Packaging as a Teams app allows you to have a simple way for admins to go and deploy their Graph Connector without relying on you too heavily. So you don't have to have a high-touch engagement with admins. And secondly, you can have a single app manifest for multiple Teams app constructs. So if you've already built like a message extension or a bot for your organization, you can just amend your manifest to include your Graph Connector as well. If you are building a Graph Connector that's meant to be consumed by other organizations, you can submit that Teams app to Microsoft, and we can validate it for you in Copilot. So you can have that confidence that, hey, when they go and deploy it, it's going to work as expected in Copilot. In addition, you get that added discoverability by having your app included in the Teams Admin Center. So I don't know if any of you guys have ever built a Microsoft Graph Connectors Teams app before, but when you do that, admins can go and deploy it with a single click of a toggle in the Teams Admin Center. So it's a super easy thing for admins to do. But that begs the question, what exactly do developers need to do to kind of unlock the stress-free deployment for admins? Well, let me tell you how. In your app manifest, you'll need to include a URL that can set the webhook notifications whenever an admin requests your Graph Connector to be turned on or to be turned off. And then there's a couple of tasks that you have to handle in order to make sure that end-to-end experience flows smoothly. So first, you have to accept the webhook notification whenever the admin requests for a change in the Graph Connector. Once you do that, you have to send a 202 response code back, verify the validation token that comes with the request, and then retrieve an access token from Microsoft Entra in order to access the Graph APIs to go and create your connection, register the schema, and do all those things. When you create the connection, you have to include what we call a Graph Connectors ticket and a connector ID, which are two fields that are going to be that initial webhook notification that you received. Once you've done that, you go and provision the connection schema and begin ingesting items. On the flip side, if the admin had requested for the connection to be deleted, you need to go ahead and delete that connection once you've handled the notification, validated the token, and done all of those tasks. So this is where Dev Proxy comes into play. Dev Proxy is an API simulator and a command line tool that allows you to test your Graph Connector end-to-end in minutes. With Dev Proxy, you don't need to have access to an M3F tenant or have admin privilege within that tenant in order to go and test out your deployment. You don't need to wait for any validation tokens to expire because it is a simulator. So that really takes down your testing time from hours to minutes. As well as within Dev Proxy, we give you helpful error messages with each error and warning that you get. But I believe the best way to understand the value of this tool is to see it in action. So without further ado, I'll hand off to Waldek, who can show you Dev Proxy in action. Take it away.
Excellent,
Waldek.
Thank you. Yeah, totally. Let me share my screen and please let me know when it's on. It should be on a screen near you in 3, 2, 1.
And we have it. Take it away.
Brilliant. All right. So as you've heard, right, like you heard that it's a great way to package a connector as a Teams app because that gives admins the ability to control it. So you don't need to manually kick off jobs and so forth and so on. And the process to do all of that, to test whether the code you wrote is working as intended, it includes a few steps. And the cool thing is that with Proxy, we can simplify it. So what you're seeing on the screen is on the right-hand side, this is kind of the API that is responsible for receiving the webhook from tag, from Teams Admin Center, and then reacting to it. So in other words, when admin will choose to enable the connector, we need to create a connection, provision schema, and start the initial ingestion. And when they turn off the connector, we need to remove the connection, and we need to do all of that, right? And then on the left-hand side, we will have the proxy mocks. We will get to that in a moment. So imagine you wrote this code. Now you want to test it. Well, you would typically need to take the Teams app, package it, upload it, and so forth and so on. But there is an easy way, right? So let me go to a terminal. And first, let me do two things. So one is, let me start this API, because at the end of the day, this is an API, right? So this is basically an API that would run typically in a cloud. In this case, I don't need to deploy anything anywhere. It's just going to run on my local box. And again, this is the actual code that I would run in production, with the caveat that it runs currently on my local box. I don't deploy anything anywhere. And you can see here a message that it's available on localhost 3000, right? So typically beyond this stage, if you were to test it in real without doing that in proxy, you would need to open up a tunnel to expose the local host on the internet and so forth and so on. So again, additional dependencies that you need to put in place. We don't need that because again, we will simulate all of that. So in other tab, let me start developer proxy with a few things that we put in place to make this possible for you to simulate this whole experience. Let me clear the screen a bit. All right. First things first, what is the first step when admin enables a connector? They click a toggle, which will then cause the Teams admin center to send a request to our API. Let's simulate that. So here I will press W to issue the web request. And in this case, this is going to be the same request that Teams admin center would send to our API. We see that, we send the notification, and there's a bunch of stuff going on. Let's have a look while this runs in the background, because we will have a bunch of operations here. So we had our request here. If we go all the way up, we validated the token, because that's something that we have to do, right? So every single time your API is being called and it's not anonymous, you got to check if the token is real. He validated, and we validated actually using the actual real code that we would use in production. We haven't changed anything about this code to work in proxy, right? It's exactly the same code that validates a token. Then we create a connection. The connection is done. We can see here, right? So in here, we go all the way up. We do what? We get the keys to validate token. We get an access token to talk to graph. Then we create the connection. We create schema. And then we wait for it even to provision. We simulate that too. And then we finally ingest items. All of these calls, here you can see we're calling graph. Again, from this app, we're calling graph. This is actual code that we would run in production, but none of these calls is leaving my box. It's all local host simulated in proxy. So this is our actual real code, the same code that you would run in production, simulated and tested in minutes without deploying anything to a tenant, admin center, building Teams apps, anything around that. We have the ability to validate end-to-end that all of this works. Now let's do a quick check, right? Imagine that I did something wrong. So let me restart proxy and let's see, will this actually help us and will this tell us when we do things wrong? So let me stop the API. Let me do a small adjustment. Let's say that when we say send a 202, I want to send a status of accepted. Let's do this. Let's see if this is the right way to do things. So let me restart the API. All right, it's ready. And let me reissue this request from tag. And there you go, failure. Why? What's wrong? Well, because Teams admin center expects an empty response, and we included a message. In real life, this would fail, and now you would need to stop the whole thing, delete the Teams app, go back to your code, adjust it, repackage, upload it, re-enable. Now you don't need to do any of these activities. You can change it on the fly because it's on the local box. But again, you have the benefit that it feels like real. It has all the right ingredients. So how all of this works? We have quite a few things in place. Let me stop all of that in case I run something that I don't intend to, right? So in proxy, we have a preset, which is basically a pre-configured set of options that we've got specifically for this case, right? So one, we have some calls that we simulate around Microsoft Entra, and that is kind of doing two things. One is to allow the code to validate the token, and then two, to get an access token to graph. Again, all of these codes, all of these calls are mocks, but they are there. So all the SDKs like MSAL, Microsoft Graph SDK, they don't know that they are talking to something else than a real API. So we're simulating the exact calls that you've got here, like for like OIDC endpoints that tell the SDK from where to get the keys that are being used to sign a token. Like all of this info is here. Then we have even things like, hey, like how like the actual keys that are being used to sign a token, so that again the code that can validate the token can actually do its job, and it all goes through. And then finally, we even have a dummy, a token that we send and back. So in case in your code you check like, hey, do I have the right claims? Do I have the right rights? You can check that too. So this is one. Two, you've seen that I can issue the webhook from tag. Right? So this is being done here. And we actually have two options because, again, you can simulate either enabling a connector or turning it off. So we have two options enable. We only use one at a time because like it wouldn't make sense if at the same time you enable and disable it because your code wouldn't know what to do, right? So you will use either one, but we give you the ability, like we offer two of them so that you can easily here pick which one you want to use. And when you look what's in there, this is actually pretty cool because this is exactly the payload that your API would get from tag. The only thing that we change here is that, like here we say, okay, which state is it? Is it turning it off and on? There's a ticket which you need to include on the request. And again, if you don't, we will show you an error. So we want to give you contextual guidance that you can use to help you build the right code as quickly as you can, right? And give you help you find potential common issues as quickly as we can so that you can complete your job as easily as you can. So in other words, like if you missed a ticket, passed the wrong value, send the wrong response, we will alert you of all of that so that you can fix it as quickly as you can. And then again, the final thing that we do is we dynamically generate a genuine access token signed by dev proxy. So again, that this code will validate the token, which is like, hey, this is a real thing. I'm okay. I can now do all of the work. Because if this would fail, none of this code would actually run. So that is exactly why, like the premise that we've got across the board is to let you keep your original code and write the actual code that you would run in production and not have to change any of it or as little as we need to for you to be able to simulate it with proxy, right? And then the final part is, so once you've done that, we validated the token, the final call is what? To create a connection, provision schema, and ingest the items. And we mock all of that too, right? So in your code, you can check like, hey, if you create a connection, we give you a 201 with response similar to real that you would get from the Microsoft Graph. When you remove a connection, we will give you a response 202, again, the same thing that you would get from Graph. When you create schema, we will give you exactly the same with a 202 with a URL that you can then call to check whether schema is already revisioned or not. And we will get even to the point where we say, you know what, it will be in progress first, and only then it will be eventually done. So with that, you can even test if your code properly waits for schema to be done, right? To be available, because that operation takes a moment or two, right? And then the final thing is like we even simulate adding activities that increase the relevance of all the items you ingest to Microsoft Graph, right? And then the final part, when you ingest the items, we simulate that too. So with that, you have a toolkit that allows you to test the connector end to end, from the deployment to Teams as a Teams app, to validate like the whole flow around that, to creating the connection, provisioning schema, ingesting the items, and even deleting the connection. With that, you've got the ability to verify all of that on your own box without a tenant, and giving you kind of the confidence, right, that once this code runs, and it works, you have the confidence that it will work as intended in production. So with that, I will give it back to Vesa now. And if there's anything you would like to ask, do reach out to us or to Majesty. I don't know if you have any additional things to add or any slides.
No, I don't. Thank you, Waldek, for kind of showing this off to the community. And please feel free to leave any questions you have in the chat.
Absolutely. And we will drop some links so that you can try this too. Thank you, folks.